problem. Gentlemen, let's talk. Long-distance relationships aren't for the faint-hearted. They demand trust, effort, consistency, and a whole lot of patience. Problem. But what happens when that patience is met with subtle shifts? When her words start sounding different, it always starts small. Problem. She says she's just busy. She doesn't feel like talking tonight. She tells you, stop overthinking. But here's the thing. Words are never just words. In Jessica Oas's world, problem, we listen between the lines because the moment you start hearing certain phrases from a woman you're investing your time, emotions, and future in, especially from afar, those words become warning signs. Problem. And a high-value man, he doesn't ignore red flags just because they're whispered sweetly. In this video, I'm breaking down the exact phrases that signal a shift in energy, in loyalty, problem, and in her emotional investment. If you're a man who values himself, values his time, and values his emotional peace, you need to watch this. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. Because sometimes, problem, the smartest thing a man can dog is run before he's chasing answers. At first begins the glance, this sentence might seem harmless. It might even sound mature, problem, like a woman who's trying to process her emotions or protect the relationship from unnecessary friction. But if you listen with wisdom, not just ears, problem, you'll realize this line often signals a shift and not the kind you want to ignore. Especially in a long-distance relationship where space already exists by default, hearing this can mean something deeper, problem. In a relationship where you're already separated by miles, time zones, and digital screens, space isn't a luxury. It's the everyday reality. You're not physically in each other's presence, problem. And you're not crowding her. You're not constantly in her face. So when she says she needs space, she's not talking about geography. She's talking about emotional detachment, problem. She's talking about pulling away, bit by bit, from connection, communication, and commitment. Let's break it down. When a woman says she needs space, what is she really saying? It could mean she's overwhelmed, problem. Yes, maybe she's dealing with personal issues, pressure, or family stress. Maybe she needs to regroup and recenter. That's one angle. But more often than not, especially when said without context, problem, it's her way of creating emotional distance from you without confrontation. It's her silent exit strategy. Think about it. People don't need space from things they're excited about, problem. They don't take breaks from people they're falling for. They don't distance themselves from what they deeply value. Unless something has shifted. When a woman's interest fades, problem, her energy doesn't leave loudly. It exits quietly, dressed as, I need time, or I need space. That's how disconnection often starts. Subtle, polite, almost invisible. Now, problem, as a man who values clarity, you might try to fix it. You might say, take all the time you need, hoping she'll come back clearer and closer. But the danger here is that while you're giving her that space, problem, someone else might already be occupying it. Emotional voids don't stay empty for long. And in long-distance relationships, attention is currency. The person who gives her the emotional attention, the consistency, problem, the understanding, that person becomes her new comfort zone. There's also a deeper psychological game at play. When a woman says she needs space, she's testing how much you'll chase. Will you double text, problem? Will you beg for her time? Will you panic and spiral, think you've done something wrong? If so, she knows she has control. But high-value men don't beg for love. They observe. They step back. They match energy, problem. And they understand that someone truly invested doesn't create unnecessary space. They build bridges to close the distance. Let's also not ignore the timing. Most women don't just drop this line randomly, problem. It usually comes after a period of low-effort responses, missed calls, emotional coldness, or arguments that never get resolved. It's the final layer of withdrawal wrapped in soft words, problem. It's not aggressive, dismissive. She wants you to accept the distance without questioning it. And many men do. Out of fear of pushing her away further, problem, they agree to the space. Without realizing they're stepping out of her emotional world altogether, problem. I just need some space right now also creates ambiguity, a gray area where she can come and go as she pleases without responsibility, problem. It gives her permission to reduce effort while keeping you emotionally hooked. You're not officially broken up, but you're also not emotionally connected, problem. It's a silent limbo where she doesn't have to be accountable. And you're left hoping, overanalyzing. This phrase can be especially painful when you've been consistent. When you've shown up, problem. Communicated, supported, and sacrificed. You start wondering, what did I do wrong? But sometimes it's not about what you did. It's about how she feels, or how she doesn't feel anymore, problem. And rather than confront those fading feelings with transparency, space becomes the shield she hides behind. In long-distance love, communication is oxygen, problem. When she starts cutting off that oxygen with vague requests for space, the emotional connection begins to suffocate, slowly, quietly, until you're the only one trying to revive what's already on life support, problem. This phrase is often weaponized. It's not always said with love and rarely with the intention to understand. It's said to shift the focus away from accountability and onto you. When a woman says, problem, why are you being so insecure? In the middle of a serious conversation about boundaries, trust, or unmet needs, it's not an invitation to grow. It's an emotional deflection. In long distance relationships, problem, insecurity isn't unusual. Physical absence breeds emotional vulnerability. You don't get to see each other every day. You don't get to pick up on body language, energy shifts, or subtle changes. So naturally, problem, you rely on communication, texts, calls, and tone of voice to gauge closeness. But when that communication starts feeling off, when your gut says something's changed, problem, and you speak on it, and her response is to label you insecure, that's not a healthy sign. She's not addressing the issue, she's avoiding it. Problem. She's not leaning in to reassure you or clarify your doubts. She's gaslighting you into silence. It's easier to call someone insecure than to answer uncomfortable questions. Problem. It's easier to make you feel guilty than to explain her recent attachment, the late replies, the mood swings, or the change in effort. And if you don't know your worth, you'll accept that label. Problem. You'll start questioning yourself instead of the situation. But here's the truth: emotional intelligence includes emotional curiosity. Problem. A confident man isn't immune to feeling uncertain. He just knows how to communicate it. And when a woman truly values you, she doesn't shame you for feeling something. She listens. She reassures. She leans in. Problem. She doesn't roll her eyes and throw the insecure label over your head like a punishment. Problem. Sometimes when a man says, "I noticed you've been distant," what he's really saying is, "I miss our connection." But if she can't see the love in that vulnerability, problem, if she only hears accusation or weakness, then she's not hearing with the right heart. "Why are you being so insecure?" is a way of silencing your truth. And if it happens repeatedly, problem, it becomes emotional manipulation, because now you stop expressing yourself. You tell yourself you're overreacting. You hold back your thoughts. Problem. You start walking on eggshells just to avoid the insecure label. That's not love. That's control. A healthy relationship invites honesty. It doesn't punish transparency. Problem. And especially in long distance dynamics, where honesty is the bridge that keeps two hearts aligned, dismissing that honesty can destroy trust. You have to ask yourself, what kind of partner do I want? Problem. Someone who sees my emotional openness as weakness, or someone who sees it as courage. Because the man who asks questions, who checks in, who notices shifts, that man isn't insecure. He's aware. Problem. He's emotionally present. And when a woman is truly invested, she won't use his sensitivity against him. She'll meet him with empathy, not sarcasm. It's also important to notice when she says this. Problem. Does she say it after you ask about another guy she keeps mentioning? After you express frustration about missed calls? After you ask her to be more consistent? If so, problem. She's not just dismissing your feelings. She's protecting something she doesn't want to explain. "Why are you being so insecure?" becomes a shield to block deeper accountability. And over time, problem, that shield becomes a wall that separates you from the truth. Because if every attempt to talk is met with shame or blame, the emotional safety dissolves. You stop feeling heard. You stop feeling seen. Problem. And worst of all, you stop being you. You become a filtered version of yourself, calculated, reserved, emotionally muted. That's not what love is supposed to do. That's not what a real connection looks like. Problem. A woman who wants to build something real with you won't make you feel crazy for caring. She won't shame you for expressing concern. She'll listen to understand, not to defend. Problem. And she'll never twist your vulnerability to a flaw, because to the right woman, your awareness is attractive. Your ability to speak up is masculine. Your emotional insight is not a weakness. It's a superpower. Problem. This line might sound kind, even selfless. It's wrapped in empathy, coded in what appears to be concern for you. But beneath the softness, problem, there's a deeper message, one that often signals a shift in emotional investment. In long distance relationships, where effort is everything, this phrase is rarely just about geography. It's about detachment. Problem. About letting go without fully admitting it. "You deserve someone closer to you" isn't just her saying she's thinking of what's best for you. Problem. It's her way of creating emotional distance without looking like the villain. It's a classic soft exit strategy. She doesn't want to have the hard conversation. Problem. She doesn't want to say, "I'm no longer invested," or "don't feel the same," because that's heavy, that's confrontational, that opens the door for questions she doesn't want to answer. So instead, problem, she shifts the narrative to your well-being. She makes it about you. This phrase turns the breakup energy into something that feels like a favor. She's not breaking away. She's freeing you. Problem. She's not giving up. She's thinking of your needs. But in reality, if a woman is still truly in love, if she still feels connected, if she still believes in the relationship, problem, distance won't make her push you away. It will make her fight harder, invest deeper, communicate more. Real love doesn't suggest you should go elsewhere because of miles. It finds new ways to bridge those miles. Problem. When she says you deserve someone closer, what she's often saying is, "This is getting too hard for me." She may be overwhelmed. She may have emotionally checked out. Problem. Or maybe there's someone, her physical world, who's now offering her the kind of attention that's easier, more immediate, more accessible. Instead of admitting she's drawn elsewhere, problem, she hands you this line and expects you to thank her for her honesty. But a high-value man must listen with discernment. He must read the intention behind the words. Problem. Because this line is designed to make you doubt yourself. You start wondering, problem, am I asking for too much? Am I holding her back? Am I selfish for wanting her to stay committed from a distance? But what you don't realize is she's already mentally started moving on. She just hasn't told you yet. Problem. She's planting the seed in your mind so that when she fully detaches, it'll feel like your idea. Let's also consider this: people don't walk away from what they value deeply. Problem. They don't look at someone they see a future with and suggest they go find someone else. That's not how commitment speaks. That's not how loyalty operates. Problem. And that's not what you say to someone you're truly building with. Because when a woman is all in, she doesn't look for exit doors, she reinforces the foundation. She finds solutions, not distance. Problem. This line is also a test. She might be gouging your reaction. Will you chase? Will you try harder to convince her you're worth the effort? It's a manipulative tool. Problem. Sometimes used to regain control in a relationship dynamic where she feels she has lost power. Problem. By making you feel like you're the one who should let go, she avoids responsibility and reclaims emotional leverage. A man who knows his worth will recognize this. Problem. He won't interpret that phrase as a genuine concern, but as a signal, a shift, a line that tells him something in her heart has changed. Problem. He won't fight to convince her of his value, because his value was never in question. What changed was her willingness to meet him halfway. What shifted was her emotional alignment. Problem. And that's not something you beg to bring back. There's also a subconscious tactic embedded in this phrase. It keeps her image clean. Problem. If she says, "You deserve someone closer," she's indirectly framing herself as the one who's too far, too unavailable, too difficult. And it sounds like humility. But in reality, problem. It allows her to exit the emotional contract of the relationship without guilt. She can walk away feeling like she did the mature thing, like she gave you permission to be free. Problem. Instead of owning up to her detachment. This sentence seemed innocent at first, maybe even reasonable in certain contexts. After all, no one owes anyone a minute by minute breakdown of their day. Problem. But when you're in a committed relationship, especially a long distance one, this phrase hits differently. It doesn't just suggest a boundary, it often signals a breakdown in transparency. Problem. A shift from openness to selective silence. Long distance relationships are built on trust, not the kind of trust you build with daily face to face interaction, but a deeper, more intentional kind. Problem. Trust that's formed through consistent communication, emotional presence, and mutual vulnerability. Problem. So when a woman starts pulling this line, "I didn't think I had to tell you everything," it's worth paying attention. Because what she's really saying is a seals problem. I'm making decisions without considering how they affect you. The truth is, in a healthy relationship, communication isn't about control. It's about connection. Problem. When something significant happens in her life, when she's making decisions that could shift emotional dynamics. Problem. When she's engaging with people or situations that might raise questions or trigger insecurity, it's not about obligation. It's about respect. Problem. It's about giving the other person the emotional courtesy of being informed, involved, and considered. So when she says she didn't think she had to tell you, problem. And what she's often doing is retroactively defending secrecy. Maybe she went somewhere and didn't mention it until afterward. Maybe she spent time with someone you've previously asked about. Problem. Maybe she made a choice that, had it been reversed, she would expect to be told about. And now when you ask about it, you're met with defensiveness instead of understanding. Problem. This phrase can also be a form of gaslighting. It flips the script and puts the burden on you. Instead of acknowledging that something might have made you feel uncomfortable or excluded, problem, she reframes it as you expecting too much. Suddenly, you're the one being controlling, clingy, or demanding. She's not hiding anything. You're just being unreasonable for wanting to know. Problem. But emotional partnership isn't about telling each other everything just for the sake of surveillance. It's about fostering an environment where you both feel safe to share. Problem. Where transparency is a default, not the exception. When a woman starts gatekeeping parts of her life, she's drawing lines between you and her world. She's building compartments. Problem. She's deciding what you're allowed to know and what she'll keep to herself. Now, this isn't about micromanaging. It's not about needing to know every detail of every interaction. It's about the tone. Problem. The timing and intention behind the silence. If she used to share her day and suddenly she's vague, if she used to tell you about the people around her and now you're hearing about them after the fact. Problem. If she's choosing what to tell you based on how much she thinks you'll push back, then her communication isn't open, it's curated. When a woman is fully emotionally available, problem, she doesn't view sharing as a task. She doesn't wait to be asked. And she doesn't make you feel guilty for being curious. She offers information freely because she knows it builds closeness, problem. And she knows it strengthens trust. And she knows that in a relationship, especially one stretched by distance, every shared truth is another brick in the foundation. But when she says, problem, "I didn't think I had to tell you everything," she's telling you that she's no longer inviting you into her full emotional space. She's creating a boundary not to protect the relationship, problem, but to protect her independence from the relationship. And while independence is important, there's a difference between healthy space and emotional evasion. Problem. This phrase is also a subtle warning sign that you're no longer on the same page because she feels like she has to defend not sharing something that clearly matters to you. Problem. Then the communication dynamic has shifted. She may be feeling disconnected. She may be reconsidering how much of her life she wants to share with you. Problem. Or she may already be acting in ways she knows would cause conflict, so she hides behind plausible deniability. Either way, problem. This line isn't just about a single moment of omission. It's about a deeper change in how she views your emotional role in her life. When she says this, don't just hear the words. Hear the shift behind them. Problem. We're just in different places emotionally is often used as a soft, indirect way to disengage. It sounds gentle. It sounds mature. Problem. It sounds she's being honest about where she is mentally and emotionally. But when you unpack it, this phrase is more about redefining the emotional dynamic between you than acknowledging a real gap. Problem. In a long distance relationship, emotional alignment is everything. You don't have the luxury of physics to compensate for disconnection. You live off emotional consistency, calls, messages, tone, effort. Problem. So when one person suddenly decides that you're no longer on the same page emotionally, it usually means they've already emotionally exited the relationship, at least partially. Problem. This line is not always a reflection of a temporary phase, often a reflection of a new reality they've already accepted. Think about the context where this phrase usually shows up. Problem. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It follows shorter conversations, a drop in emotional intimacy, a sudden inability to talk about the future. You might have sensed something was off. Problem. And when you finally bring it up, this is the line you get. And what it really does is create space. Not just physical or emotional space, but accountability space. Problem. She uses it to remove herself from any obligation to meet you where you are emotionally. When someone is fully invested, they don't talk about emotional places. They talk about how to get to a shared place. Problem. They don't describe the gap, the bridge. But when she says, we're just in different places emotionally, she's saying she's no longer willing to build. Maybe she once was. Maybe she did try. Problem. But now the gap is more comfortable for her than the work it would take to close it. And often, this phrase is a prelude to exit. It's a way of emotionally preparing you for detachment while softening the blow. Problem. Because instead of saying, I'm not feeling the same way anymore, she says, we're just not in the same place. Instead of saying, problem, I'm no longer willing to grow this, she frames it like a neutral mismatch as if it's nobody's fault. But emotional disconnection doesn't just happen. It grows quietly when effort dies. Problem. When communication fades, when the willingness to understand each other is replaced by apathy. This phrase can also be used as a mirror. When she says it, she might be implying that you're moving too fast. Problem. That you want clarity or commitment she's no longer ready to give. So instead of owning her fears or hesitations, problem, she frames you as the one who's had emotionally and herself as the one who's not there yet. This shifts the emotional pressure onto you. Suddenly you're the one who's too intense, too ready, problem, too involved, and that can make you shrink. It can make you start suppressing your needs just to match her energy. But here's the thing, emotional mismatches are rarely the core issue. Problem. What really hurts is when one person stops trying to meet the other halfway. You can be in different emotional spaces and still move forward if both people are willing. Problem. The problem starts when one person checks out and the other is left to carry the emotional weight alone. That's when you feel the distance, not just in miles, but in presence. This line also introduces ambiguity. Problem. Different places emotionally could mean anything. It leaves you guessing, confused. Is she unsure? She done? Is she seeing someone else? And while your mind is busy decoding the phrase, problem, she's quietly detaching. She's already adjusted her expectations, decided she's no longer going to show up the same way. And now you're the one left wondering where it all went wrong. Problem. When a woman uses this phrase, what she's really expressing is a decline in emotional engagement, whether it's caused by external stress, new interests, or simple fading desire. Problem. She's no longer emotionally sensed with you. And instead of facing it directly, she abstracts it. She makes it sound like a phase when it's often a decision. And the sooner you recognize that problem, the sooner you stop chasing alignment that no longer exists. At first, it sounds like feedback, maybe even constructive criticism. But in reality, problem. When a woman in a long-distance relationship starts calling you too sensitive, she's not offering clarity, she's creating distance. This phrase is a form of emotional dismissal. Problem. It's not an observation, it's a silencer. And in the context of relationship where communication is already fragile due to distance, this can be deeply damaging. Problem. Long-distance relationships require emotional nuance. Since you can't see each other daily, your emotional language becomes your primary bond. You rely on texts, voice notes, calls, late-night conversations. Problem. And the space between words to keep the connection alive. So when you express discomfort, confusion, or hurt, and she responds with, you're too sensitive, she's not meeting you halfway. Problem. She's minimizing your experience. This line often comes after you've brought up something real. Maybe you told her how it made you feel when she ignored your message for hours without explanation. Problem. Maybe you noticed a change in tone or effort and finally decided to speak up. Maybe you asked a question she didn't want to answer, and instead of addressing your concerns, she flips the script. Problem. She turns your emotional awareness into a flaw. The danger of this phrase lies in what it teaches you about your emotions. If repeated often enough, you start second guessing your own instincts. Problem. You wonder if you really are too sensitive. You begin to filter your words. You hold back what you feel to avoid being labeled. And in doing so, problem, you lose access to one of the most powerful tools in a healthy relationship, emotional honesty. This tactic isn't just dismissive, it's strategic. Problem. It buys her room to act in ways that would normally call for accountability. It allows her to keep doing things that affect you without having to explain them. Problem. Because if you are the problem, if your sensitivity is the issue, then she's off the hook. She doesn't need to change. She doesn't need to reflect. Problem. She doesn't need to ask if her behavior is hurtful or confusing. She simply tells you you're feeling too much and walks away emotionally untouched. Problem. But here's what needs to be said. Sensitivity isn't awareness. It means you notice shifts in energy. It means you care enough to pay attention. It means you're emotionally available. Problem. And if your sensitivity makes her uncomfortable, it may be because she's not equipped to meet you at that level of depth. Or maybe she's no longer invested enough to bother trying. Problem. Some women use this phrase to dodge real intimacy. Vulnerability requires emotional responsibility. It requires holding space for your partner, even when it's inconvenient. Problem. So when she calls you sensitive, she's opting out of that responsibility. She's choosing surface level communication over emotionally intelligent dialogue. Problem. She's protecting health from the emotional labor of addressing your needs. Let's also talk about tone. When she says this, pay attention to how she says it. Is it sarcastic, cold, dismissive? Problem. Or is it followed by genuine curiosity and support? Because there's a difference between someone helping you gain perspective and someone weaponizing your emotions to make you feel small. Problem. In healthy relationships, both people are allowed to feel. They're encouraged to explore their emotional triggers. They're invited to share discomfort without fear of ridicule. Problem. You're too sensitive is often just the first step. It opens the door for more invalidation. It teaches you to bury your emotional truth. And in long-distance relationships, once communication becomes filtered, problem, the entire connection becomes performative. You start showing her the version of you she'll tolerate, not the version of you that's real. That's where resentment grows. Problem. That's where emotional disconnection begins. And most importantly, that's when you stop recognizing yourself in the relationship. What she's really saying when she throws this line out, problem, is that she doesn't want to deal with the weight of your experience. Whether it's because she's overwhelmed, detached, or emotionally unavailable, she wants to keep things light, convenient, easy, undemanding. Problem. But that's not how meaning connections are built. You can't grow trust in a place where your emotions are routinely invalidated. Problem. You can't build closeness with someone who treats your vulnerability like an inconvenience. At first glance, this sounds thoughtful, caring even. It frames her as considerate. Problem, like she's protecting your peace or giving you space. But when you look a little deeper, especially in the context of a long-distance relationship, this phrase often signals emotional disconnection. Problem. It's not always about being considerate. It's often about withholding, detaching, and quietly withdrawing emotional boundaries. In a healthy connection, you share, not because you're expected to, problem, but because there's emotional safety. You trust your partner to handle your truth. You believe that your feelings, your problems, your insecurities have a place in their world. So when she says, problem, I didn't want to bother you with it, what she's really doing is removing you from her emotional equation. She's decided for you that you can't or shouldn't handle what's going on in her world. Problem. This might seem like a one-off statement, but it rarely is. Over time, this pattern of emotional withholding becomes noticeable. She starts telling about things after the fact. Important updates. Problem. Difficult situations, things she used to run to you with. Now you hear about them late or not at all. You start realizing you're only being shown pieces of her reality. And the deeper parts, the vulnerable, raw, major problem, real parts are being kept away. And when you ask her why, she responds with this line, I didn't want to bother you with it. As if your emotional presence is a burden. Problem. As if including you would somehow be an inconvenience. But here what's actually happening, she's quietly choosing to process her life without, whether it's out of pride, fear, or emotional disengagement. Problem. She's creating a new dynamic, one where she deals with the heavy things on her own, and you're left with a curated version of who she is. This statement can also be a test. Sometimes, problem, she says it not because she really believed you'd be bothered, because she wanted to see if you'd notice she was pulling away. She wanted to gauge your emotional investment. Problem. She wanted to feel out your reaction when you realize she didn't confide in you. If you don't react strongly, she takes it as confirmation that you're not as emotionally available as she hoped or worse problem, as she once believed. There's also a layer of control embedded in this phrase. By choosing not to tell you, she keeps control of the emotional narrative. She doesn't have to deal with your reaction problem, your questions, your support, or perspective. She gets to handle things her way, independently and without the accountability that comes with emotional partnership problem. And while independence is important in a committed relationship, emotional exclusion isn't independence, it's avoidance. And what's more, this phrase slowly rewrites your role in her life problem. You go from being her confidant to being her audience, from being her partner to being she ups someone dates only when convenient. You stop feeling needed, you stop feeling included. And in long distance relationships problem, where physical presence is already missing, being emotionally excluded hits even harder. It makes you feel like a background character in her story instead of someone who's supposed to be part of the plot problem. It's important to understand that someone who's emotionally invested doesn't protect you from their reality. They invite you into it. They trust you with the messness problem. They believe in your ability to stand beside them, not just in the easy moments, but in the uncertain ones too problem. So when she stops sharing under the guise of not wanting to bother you, it's not a sign of respect. It's often a sign of detachment. And let's be honest, problem. Most people don't withhold from those they feel deeply connected to. They withhold from those they're unsure of, from those they don't fully trust, from those they're emotionally retreating from. Problem. Because once you stop showing someone the hard stuff, you're also signaling that you no longer see them as someone you can lean on. Problem. This is why that one phrase, I didn't want to bother you with it, shouldn't be taken lightly. It often marks the beginning of a silent pullback. And if it becomes a pattern problem, what it really means is she's no longer building mentalizing. She's editing her vulnerability. And she's starting to walk through life in a way that doesn't require your presence problem, your support, or your closeness. When a woman begins speaking in phrases that shift blame, deflect responsibility, or subtly shut you out, don't just hear the words. Feel the shift problem. Hear the emotional doors quietly closing, carefully chosen language. These aren't just offhand comments, they're signs, pat warnings, not always explosive, not always cruel, but always revealing problem. A woman who's still emotionally present won't need to hide behind vague excuses or emotional redirection. She won't gaslight your instincts, shrink your needs, or make you feel guilty for having expectations. Problem. Real love, especially at a distance, is built on effort, clarity, mutual emotional visibility. Problem. So when the words start changing, when phrases like, you're just in different places, or I didn't want to bother you begin surfacing regularly, it's not just emotional drift problem, it's emotional retreat. And if you're always the one holding the weight of the relationship, carrying the connection, explaining your feelings, justifying your presence, at some point, problem. You have to stop asking if you're too much out asking if she's enough. You are not crazy for noticing the distance. You're not weak for wanting reassurance, problem. And you are certainly not too sensitive, expecting reciprocity. For version of you who loved with openness, asked with honesty, and stayed loyal in absence deserves someone who shows up emotionally, problem. Not someone who slowly disappears behind polite exits and vague explanations. Pay attention. Watch what shifts. Believe what's shown, not just what's said, problem. Because the moment you stop ignoring these signs is the moment you start choosing yourself